Hello my amazing people, and welcome back to my channel. If you're back, if you are new, welcome to my channel. I'm Shayna and I have a solved case for you all today. Just my usual disclaimer, this is all information that I have found online and compiled into a video for educational purposes. Before I get started, I would just like to let you guys know this case is infuriating. It's very frustrating what happened in this case, so just brace yourselves for that. It's a very gross example of police negligence, and there are a lot of things that kind of happen in the case that leave you wondering why things are the way that they are in the judicial system. And this case actually takes place in the UK, which is interesting. I'll let you guys experience the case firsthand. Without further ado, thank you so much for joining me today, and let's get started. Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman were two half-sisters who lived in the UK, and they were extremely close, even though they actually had 19 years between them. The two were daughters of Wilhelmina Smallman, who was a former school teacher in her earlier years, and later in life became an archdeacon in the Church of England, which was very impressive because Mina was actually the first Black archdeacon in the Church of England ever. So this was a huge milestone for her, and her girls were always so incredibly proud of Mina. Mina's mother was actually Scottish and her father was Nigerian, and she had 3 daughters in total, with Biba and Nicole being 2 of them. Biba was a mother herself, and she was 46 years old at the time that this case took place, residing in northwest London, and she was described by everybody to be strong. That was the adjective that everyone described her as, and it was kind of funny because Wilhelmina actually said that she felt like her daughter had this short complex because she was just barely 5 feet tall, but her personality was so enormous that they always joked that she compensated for her lack of height with her personality, because she was strong and she was strong-willed, and when she was in a room, you knew it. She was one of those people who just stood out in a crowd, and not in a negative way, not in an overbearing way, but she was just full of life and full of energy and really a great joy to be around. Biba always wanted to dedicate her life to helping people, to helping the vulnerable in society, especially children. And in her earlier years, when she was still a young mom, she was actually working as a driver for disabled children. She would pick them up and take them to their activities and drive them back home. And she was so dedicated to this that even when she didn't have coverage for her daughter to be babysat, she would bring her daughter with her while she was working throughout the day. Nothing stopped her from her objectives of wanting to give back. And then as she got older, she became a social worker. She became a senior social worker, and she was so passionate about this because every single day she got to directly impact the lives of children, and that was something that was so important to her. Biba was really a magnet for all types of people. She wanted to have fun all the time. She had this really serious side to her, but also this really joyful and playful side, and she got along with all types of people. She was that person that everyone flocked to like a moth to a flame. She was really just this person that was bubbly and, like I said, an absolute pleasure to be around. Everyone loved her, and everyone knew that anytime Biba was there, they were gonna have a good time. Now, Nicole, while, like I said, was very close to her older sister, Nicole, being 27 years old, was different in her own ways. She was calm and reserved and shy. She did have this mystifying energy about her. Her mother described her. She said that she and her father always said that Nicole was supposed to be born in the 60s because she just had this chill and hippie vibe to her. She cared about the environment. She cared about humanitarianism. She was this all around really loving energy, and this type of person who didn't light up a room. She was described to be a nightlight in a room. Like, she constantly glowed, but it was in this really reserved and mysterious and intriguing way, which was really cool. Nicole was this different type of girl, and she and Biba were polar opposites, but so close. They adored each other, and she loved the arts and was talented and passionate about documentary making. She really loved theater and singing and everything to do with the performance arts. She graduated from the University of Westminster and had been in a relationship with a man named Adam. They were together for 6 years at the time that this case took place, and they were the proud parents of a bearded dragon. She was also living in London at the time, in Northwest London, and she worked as a freelance photographer. So fast forward to June of 2020, the sisters are very excited because Biba's 46th birthday was coming up, and they were planning this outdoor birthday celebration. And they were planning an outdoor celebration because it was in the midst of the lockdowns where pretty much all businesses were closed at this point. So having different mandates in place that kept people from being indoors left them no choice but to move the celebration outside. And she didn't want to have it in her house. She wanted to make sure that she was cognizant of everyone's safety. So she planned for everyone to meet up at Friant Country Park in Wembley, Northwest London. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but that's the location that she was planning this birthday bash. It was going to be about 10 people all together. They were going to have drinks and food and music, take some pictures, dance, just enjoy themselves for the evening. Nicole and Biba got there first so that they could set up everything. They had different cushions and blankets for people to sit on, and then everyone else arrived shortly thereafter, and it was a really nice evening. It was calm, but it was fun. They were taking pictures and reminiscing and laughing, and everyone was in awe by how beautiful the night sky was that night. It was just altogether a great evening. It turned out to be absolutely perfect, and Biba was so happy because she had her sister with her, she had all the people that she cared about with her, and she was just satisfied with the way that her birthday celebration was going. As the night went on, the friends started to get ready to leave, and about by midnight, all of them had left except for Biba and Nicole, who wanted to just hang out and relax a little bit longer. They were in this celebratory mood and wanted to take advantage of the time that they had together that night. So they kept their music playing, they set up their phone, they began taking selfies. They had these fairy light sticks that they were dancing around with and singing, and it was just pure joy. It was as pure as you can imagine. The two of them just enjoying each other's company and enjoying this celebration of life for Biba. Late in that night, Nicole texted her boyfriend Adam to let him know that she was still there, and she texted him saying, "I'm dancing in a field," so he was relieved to know that she was okay, and he figured she'd probably be out late celebrating with her sister, and he ended up going to bed and wasn't really worried because he knew it was a relatively safe area. It was a public place. There weren't many people in that area. It was open fields, and it had this nice view of the city, and it was a place that people usually went to stargaze or just to vegetate. It was a really calm place, so he had nothing to worry about. He made his way to bed, and he knew that his girlfriend was out safely with her sister. The next morning when he wakes up, he had not heard from Nicole yet, but at this point he still didn't have anything to worry about. But he called her a couple times and wasn't able to get her on the phone, so he opens his phone up and uses a location finder app similar to Find My iPhone if you have an iPhone. And when he goes to pull up her location, it says that her location isn't found, and he's unable to track anything. He's not sure what's going on. He's texting her, he's not getting any reply. And that morning he started to feel a little uneasy, but he still wasn't worried to the point of calling anyone yet. He was just trying to make his own attempts to get in contact with Nicole. But a couple more hours had gone by, and he really had the fear and the panic start to set in when he got word from Nicole's housemate that she hadn't come home the night before. Being the good boyfriend that he was willing to rest at nothing until he knew for sure that Nicole was safe. So he called their mother Mina to notify her that he was having trouble getting in contact with Nicole or Biba, and he actually decided to go down himself to Biba's house to bang on the door to see if they had crashed there. and there was no answer from the door. There was absolutely no sign of either one of them. Both of their phones were going to voicemail. At this point, Mina is also calling their phones to see if she can get one of them on the line, but there was absolutely nothing. Still attempting to exhaust all options, Adam pulls up Nicole's bank account that he had access to, and he saw that she hadn't made any transactions on her debit card that day. I mean, Adam is going all out. It seems like he was a police officer because he was exhausting every single option to ensure that he found Nicole. He wasn't giving up. And as the day turned into evening, this feeling came over him of uncertainty and of just feeling off, because this was not like Nicole. And it hit him like a ton of bricks when he realized that Nicole hadn't contacted anyone to make sure that her bearded dragon was fed. This bearded dragon was her child. And if she couldn't get home to feed the bearded dragon, she would always phone a friend or phone Adam to ask for them to please go care for the bearded dragon. And she hadn't done this. She hadn't called her roommate. She hadn't called Adam. She still hadn't called Mina either. And he knew in his gut that that was a clear sign that Nicole was not okay, because this was totally out of her character. All of the things combined. Now, in conjunction with the fact that she wasn't there to care for the one thing that she probably cared about second to her family and loved ones, it just was this snowballing kind of feeling of something is really wrong here. Between 5 and 9 p.m. that evening, Adam decides to call the police and notify them that he believes that something terrible has happened to Nicole and her sister, and that he needs them to please help them look for them. And when he makes his phone call, he feels from the very beginning that police are listening to him, but they're not really paying any serious attention to what he's saying. Like, they're asking him questions and possibly taking notes, but there was no sense of urgency that he was getting from the other end of the phone call. And when he got off the phone with the police the first time, he actually decided to call Mina to let her know that he had this feeling that the police weren't really planning to do anything right away to help them. And Mina says, okay, let me call. She gets off the phone with Adam, calls the police as well. And Adam is spreading the word to all the friends of Biba and Nicole, and they're also calling the police too. Everyone was rallying to make sure that the police started acting on looking for Biba and Nicole, but they all got this "we'll get to it" attitude from the police. And Mina was calling multiple times. She was calling over and over again, because every time she would call, there would be no follow-up or nobody would get back to her. And she was not satisfied with this. And when she would call back, she would get a different person every time. She would have to re-explain the whole situation again. And she could just tell that there was no designated person at this point who was working the case. There was no sense of, okay, we need to actually take this seriously. And she was actually told by police, don't worry, they're probably just hungover. They probably just passed out wherever they were last night, and I'm sure they'll turn up. And she says, no, their phones are not getting us connected with them. Something is really wrong. And police came back and said to her, well, their phones probably died. So we all know the typical series of events when a panicked parent or loved one tries to report someone missing, and the police give them the runaround of, oh, well, you have to wait 12 hours, or, oh, this is okay, you know, this is teenage behavior. Obviously, these are grown women, but this is behavior. People can go missing if they want to sometimes, so we have to wait. And it's very disheartening because nobody knows these two women like their family. And their family were insisting to police that something was terribly wrong, and their pleading with the police was going completely unanswered. Literally, the only thing that this concerned family wanted to hear was that the police were going to go search for the two women. But they didn't receive this. They didn't receive any reassurance at all. So they knew that they had to take it upon themselves to go and search. So Adam organized a search for the very next morning on June 7th. He notified Biba's best friend, Nina Esmat, and he also planned to take his parents. So the four of them went down to the park that the two women were at the night before, and they planned to disperse and begin looking for any clues that they could find. Nina really wanted to be hands-on in this search because she was friends with Biba since they were 16 years old. And she knew her friend, she knew her patterns, and she knew that Biba not getting back to her was not normal. Biba was very hands-on, very communicative, and she was not the type of person who would just fall off the face of the earth. And Nicole wasn't the type of person who would do this either, and who would let her pet go unfed and who wouldn't communicate with her boyfriend. And neither of them were the type who wouldn't answer their mother's phone calls. So everyone kind of knew that something had to be wrong because this was so uncharacteristic of both of them. Just so we're clear, Mina is the mother of Nicole and Biba, and Nina is the best friend of Biba. So just so you guys are clear and don't get too confused. So Nina, Adam, and Adam's parents make their way into the common ground, and before they even make real headway into the area, Nina sees something glinting in the sunlight in the grass, and she gets up close and she realizes that these are glasses that belong to Biba. She knew that these were her best friend's glasses, and she said that the pit of her stomach just fell to the floor because Biba didn't go anywhere without her glasses. She needed her glasses for everything. And Nina called the police, notified them that she had found these, and for some reason, instead of telling her to leave them be because this could be an active crime scene, the police insisted that she pick up the glasses and bring them down to the police station. So that's what she did, while Adam and his parents continued to search. The next item to be spotted was spotted by Adam, and it was actually another pair of glasses. This time, these were sunglasses that belonged to Nicole, and he recognized them because they were sunglasses that his girlfriend wore often. And instead of picking them up, he actually decided to leave them be because at this point he knew something was terribly wrong and that they were most likely on an active crime scene, and he didn't want to mess up any of the evidence. So he left the glasses where they were and continued on. Like I told you guys, Adam was doing more forward thinking than the police throughout this entire case. This is just one more example of that, and I promise you guys it gets so much worse as far as the police go. But he left the glasses there and they continued on. He made a mental note of where they were, and Adam's father actually saw something glinting in the sunlight, and when they got up close to it, they realized that it was a bloody knife. And at this point, panic mode set in. They were frantic. Adam was frantic. He knew that Nicole was probably still in this park somewhere, and he kept looking and running and searching for her, and he came across a pair of feet. And when he got up close to the feet, he realized that they were that of Nicole Smallman, his girlfriend. And when he got even closer, he saw that she was intertwined with her sister, Biba Henry, and both of them had been killed. Adam fell to the ground in grief in that moment, knowing that his life and the life of so many that cared about these two would never be the same again. Both Biba and Nicole had their eyes open, very slightly, just blank stares on their faces, and it was evident that they were stabbed. They had blood all over them, and they were kind of in this brush as if their bodies were attempted to be hidden, just not very well. But when Adam and his parents were standing there looking at the scene, it was very obvious that this was a third party that did this to them, and that there was 1000% foul play involved. Absolutely no questions asked about that. Adam unfortunately had the awful job of notifying Mina that both of her daughters were found in this condition, and he also had to notify Nina, Biba's best friend, that he had found them and that they were gone. Police arrived on the scene, ready to finally begin their investigation, and they started by taking the knife and the sunglasses and taking those in for evidence. They also conducted a search of the grounds and came across a blue latex glove that they figured they should probably take in for evidence as well. They were hoping that on these items they would be able to find the DNA of whoever had committed this awful crime, so that they would have some real concrete direction to head in beginning the investigation here. Nicole had 38 stones, which was significant. I couldn't find exactly how many Biba had, but it seemed like there was emphasis put on how many Nicole had because she most likely had more than her sister. And when forensics was just looking into exactly what happened here, they found that the way that the two women died, while they were similar, they were actually very different, and it helped police to paint a picture of exactly how the attack on Biba and Nicole took place that night. Biba had absolutely no defensive wounds, which means that whoever attacked the women took Biba completely by surprise and most likely attacked her first. She would not have seen whoever did this coming. She had no idea that they were approaching her, because if she did, she would have most likely put her hands up or her arms up to defend herself, but she had absolutely no wounds on her hands or her arms, indicating that she put up a fight. So whoever did this saw the two together and went for Biba very first. In comparison to Nicole, who had 38 wounds, like I said, altogether, most of them being defensive wounds. So it was obvious that she had most likely seen whoever did this to her sister, and she knew that she was about to face the same fate, and she was preparing to put up a huge fight. She also was found with a piece of white birch tree in her hand, which to some indicates that possibly she was looking for a tree or a branch to fight off the attacker with. But one of the biggest take homes here that kind of gave me chills when I was really sitting and thinking about it was when she saw her sister getting stabbed to death, she didn't run away. She actually stayed there and probably tried to fight for her sister, and she wanted to fight for herself too. She didn't just abandon her sister in that moment to save herself. She stayed there like the brave soul that she was and witnessed this awful thing happen to her sister before she met the same fate. And she had so many and the nature and the angles that they were, it was evident to police that after she had fallen to the ground and given up the fight, she was continuously further. So this was a really brutal attack. This was a very calculated attack, and it would have been an absolute frenzy, an absolute few minutes of complete chaos. And if you take a moment and try to put yourself in that setting where this took place, it is one of the worst possible scenes you could ever imagine. Police went through the women's phones to find any traces or clues of anything that could have shown them who did this, right? They were looking for anything that showed the moments before the women had their lives taken from them. And what they did find was that right around 1 a.m., the women were taking a series of photographs using a clicker. And you can tell that they're dancing and singing and smiling in these pictures, even though it's dark outside. And they have these fairy lights that they're waving around. And you can just tell that they are really enjoying themselves in this moment, just dancing under the stars and just surrounded by love and happiness. And it's just so incredibly beautiful. But the last picture was taken at 1:13 a.m. And in this photograph, the women appear to be looking to their left and jolting as if they were taken by surprise, and it's giving me chills just talking about it. But in the pictures, you can see there's really no rhyme or reason to their movement up until that very last picture taken at 1:13 a.m. where they are suddenly caught off guard and looking to their left, which police infer that this was most likely the moment that their attacker snuck up on them and they realized that someone else was there with them and they weren't alone anymore. So with this photograph found on the phone, and very clearly a photo that was not supposed to be the last one because they had taken a bunch of pictures before this, and just knowing that they were distracted by something and then this was the last picture that was taken by the clicker that one of them had, that gave police the confirmation that the time of the attack probably happened right after that picture. So police projected that the attack happened just after 1 a.m. The police still had no suspects at this point, but they became hopeful when they received notice from the lab that the DNA that was found on the knife actually matched DNA that was found on the women's body as well. So they were hopeful that this DNA could possibly give them a match to whoever the perpetrator was. And they knew that since the DNA was on the knife and it didn't belong to the women, that this probably was the perpetrator. So they knew that they at least had this to go on, but they still weren't really sure who the person was. There was still more testing. They still had to run it through the database. And when they ran the DNA through the database, it did come back. There was a hit on a man named Kamal Hussein. And the DNA, it was unclear. It just said that there was a hit, but it was unclear if they were indicating that this was a close match to Kamal, if the DNA was for sure his, or if it was someone in close relation to him. But they at least had a direction to go at this point, and they knew that they had to start with the Hussein household, with Kamal and any men that lived in this household. Kamal did have an 18-year-old son named Daniel Hussein, who had a pretty extensive history of a troubled childhood. From 2017 to 2018, he was enrolled in a mental health program that aided troubled adolescents, and he was also known to have very extreme political views. There were classmates that had reported him saying that he wanted to hurt people, and he just didn't have a very reassuring energy about him, let's just put it that way. And there were reports of this from the time that he was 12 years old. So he had a very troubled childhood, and his father had mentioned that he was worried that Daniel was going down the wrong path. But, you know, it was just basically signs of a troubled teen, not necessarily someone who was capable of committing this type of crime. But knowing these things about Daniel's history, police were absolutely keeping him in mind and began surveillance on him and began looking into anything that they could find on his recent track record of the things that he was doing around the 5th and 6th of June of 2020. Police were able to get their hands on CCTV footage right outside the house of the Husseins. I mean, right outside. Clear as day CCTV footage. And on this footage, the night of June 5th, which was the night of the celebration, Daniel was seen leaving his father's house with these blue latex gloves on, and he leaves at 8:45 p.m. and walks in the direction of the park. In addition to this, Daniel is seen again that same night or the very next day, early morning at 4 a.m., coming back to his father's house. His pants were missing and his hand was bloody and injured. So police couldn't narrow him down to the location just yet. They were still trying to put together their case against him. But at this point, it looked almost for certain that Daniel could have been the person who did this, because the time frame lines up. All of the damning evidence against him was piling up, and police actually got another tip when they went ahead and looked into the history of where the knife that was found at the scene had been purchased from. There was a specific store that sold this type of knife, this brand of knife, and they went to the store, got their hands on the CCTV footage, and Daniel is seen in 4K, y'all, purchasing the exact type of knives that the murder weapon would have been from. And if it wasn't bad enough, police were able to pick up on Daniel's activity the day after the attacks on the 6th, and they saw this fool going into a nearby hospital to get stitches on his hand. So I told you guys that his hand was very badly injured. I mean, like slashed, because the knife that he used was very, very sharp for the attack. And he went down to the hospital, told him that he had some injuries, got stitches on his hand, and again, he is caught in 4K right on camera getting these stitches. Well, not actually getting the stitches, but walking into the hospital to request aid for his injury that he received from killing 2 people. But I digress. Shortly after 1 a.m. on July 1st, 2020, Daniel Hussein was arrested for the murder of Nicole Smallman and Biba Henry. And if you're thinking it can't get worse than it already is looking for Daniel, once they arrest him, they conduct a search of the Hussein household, and they find a note in Daniel's room basically indicating that Daniel had this pact or this contract or this deal with the devil that he would, in exchange for winning the Mega Millions lottery, kill 6 women every 6 months. And I'm going to read you the note. It says, agreement for the mighty King Lucifugo. I can't even read this handwriting, y'all. Basically for Lucifer. What Lucifer gets is that Daniel will perform a minimum of 6 sacrifices every 6 months for as long as he is free and physically able, that he will sacrifice only women, he will build a temple, and that he will do everything that he has promised. That's what the devil gets out of the deal. And then Daniel writes, for me, so what Daniel's supposed to get out of the deal is win the Mega Millions super jackpot, receive fruitful rewards in return for the future sacrifices I make to you. The rewards could consist of wealth and power, and to never be suspected of any crimes by the police, and also that the police will never know of any of the crimes that I have done and that I will do. And it's signed Daniel. And it's signed Daniel in his own blood too. There was absolutely no question about who had done this at this point. After he got arrested, there was still more things adding on to the case against him. But at this point, the good news was that police did have a motive. They were able to present to a jury a very clear motive, and the motive was that he had convinced himself that he would win the Mega Millions jackpot and have wealth and power if he sacrificed 6 women every 6 months. Throughout the trial, Daniel just looked totally unimpressed. He looked totally uninterested in being there. He was looking out the window. He just didn't show any remorse, and he was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison. And the judge said that they wish that they could have given him a life sentence, but whatever laws exist in the UK in that area basically prevented them from sentencing an 18-year-old to a life sentence. So he got 35 years in prison. And what's interesting is that he denies culpability still to this day. He had denied it when he was arrested, all throughout the trial. He still denies it, even though he was caught in 4K purchasing the knives, leaving his father's home, getting stitches. His note was found and confirmed to be written by him. He still denied everything. And it's just really awful to think about lack of closure that he was willing to give the family of Biba and Nicole. The lack of closure that he was willing to give, and the disconnect there. Because when you can do something so awful, most people will feel a little twinge of remorse. It was very evident that he didn't, and that he was not planning to admit to anything, and that he was basically just looking at them like, I don't know why y'all are tripping, because that's not me on that camera. And he still to this day holds that same stance. And the defense attempted to make the argument that he was unfit to stand trial, or also that he was on the autism spectrum, but it was found by multiple mental health professionals rather, that he had no indication that he was on the spectrum. And even if he was, it wasn't on the level that would warrant him being not held accountable for his actions. He was absolutely found to be competent and able and fit to stand trial. So that's also very scary, because it goes to show that there wasn't a disconnect there. He was very cognizant and very aware of exactly what he was doing. And it just makes you think that if he hadn't gotten injured as badly as he was when he attacked Biba and Nicole, in the 3 weeks before police arrested him, he almost certainly would have attacked again so that he could meet his 6 women in 6 months quota. And that's scary to think about as well. I think maybe he is still under the impression that the devil is going to protect him. Like somehow this pact that he made with the devil, since it was signed in blood or something, like the devil's gonna come save him. But I don't know. The justice system is in its own way a devil. I mean, we've seen awful people get let out of jail way too soon. So unfortunately, since he did not receive a life sentence, it is possible that he could get let out before 35 years, and he'll still be pretty young at that point, which is absolutely terrifying. So we've talked about how slow to move the police were in this case, and unfortunately, it is a very clear illustration, yet again, of a lack of urgency on the part of police when it comes to people of color or women. And that's also a conversation that's very important to be had. It also, in addition, illustrates the issues that exist when people call to report their loved ones to be missing and are told by police that they won't search for them until a certain time has passed, when we know the first 48 hours are the absolute most critical. Wilhelmina has very clearly stated publicly that she is certain that her daughter's case was handled with such neglect because of their skin color. And she knows in her heart as a mother that when police saw the address on under Biba's name, that when they saw that she lived in government housing, that she was automatically treated different by default. And Mina has been very vocal about this. Just so we're clear, there's not a competition, right? Mina has said that herself, it's not a competition. We don't want our cases to be handled better than other people's cases, but we want them to be handled with the same urgency and the same respect. And respect is something that we will get into in a second, because when I tell you about what the police did, you are going to be disgusted. So going back to that day in 2020, this is probably the worst part, one of the worst parts of this awful, awful case. Going back to that day in 2020, police were dispatched to begin their investigation, and there were 2 police officers who were specifically designated to guard the grounds, basically just to watch the perimeter, make sure nobody was able to come and go that wasn't authorized. These police officers' last names were Jaffer and Lewis. It was reported and confirmed that these 2 men breached the perimeter, went farther than they were authorized to go, to look at the bodies of Nicole and Biba. And these men proceeded to take selfies with the bodies. 2 pictures were taken on one phone, 4 pictures taken on the other phone. And perhaps the worst and most unsettling part of all of this is that these men shared these photos. One was sent to a man who was a doctor, one was sent to a dentist, and one was sent in a group chat on WhatsApp. Okay? And these are pictures of these women in their most vulnerable state, when we should be protecting whatever dignity they have left. Everything's been stripped away from them. These are the last moments that we can protect whatever happens to them before they're laid to rest, right? And these men, these monsters, take pictures with them and proceed to send them in a group chat. And you wouldn't believe what one of them says, y'all. This man was quoted saying, and we have proof of this, quote, "We are at the scene of 2 dead birds." It's just so incredibly disheartening to see that 2 men appointed, chosen, who decided, who stood up and who volunteered to respect and care and protect the community would do something so awful. And you cannot sit there and act like their race was not a part of this. You cannot do it. That is a very clear example of how women of color are treated differently, even in their last moments when they can't even stand up for themselves anymore. They're still awaiting sentencing, but they have been removed from the police force, and they have pled guilty for the charges of taking and sharing these photos that they were unauthorized to take and share. It's just awful, y'all. But Mina has been very vocal about how she feels as a mother in the aftermath of all this, about how losing her children was just this devastating, awful chain of events. But then everything that happened after it was just like, seriously? You know, no parent should have to bury their children. That's not how things should go. But then to be dragged through the dirt with all of this nonsense is just absolutely painful. And there's a lot of cases where I feel like I relate to the people involved in the case, or, you know, not relate, but I almost feel like I feel their pain through my research. And this one just like pulls at me. Like it eats me up. It burns me up to know what happened here. That there was so much of a miscarriage of justice throughout the whole thing. And it's like the perpetrator is in prison, but at what cost? We brought people here to investigate who just completely disrespected and demeaned and stole the respect and the dignity from 2 women in the moment that they deserved it the most. I normally really enjoy giving my thoughts after talking about a case, but I truly feel like this case speaks for itself. I think it's important to listen to this story. Remember that this happened a year ago, and just know how far we are from real change. It's important to think about when you listen to true crime. I know you guys are true crime junkies just like myself, but never forget that these are real people. Never forget that this is real life, that these awful things aren't in a TV show. I don't mean to ruin your day. That is not my intention. But if nothing else, I do hope to make you guys think, and also just to pay homage and to show respect to these two women because they deserve it. But without further ado, thank you guys so much for joining me today. You know what I'm going to say. If you made it this far, you are loyal. You really are. And I appreciate you. I hope you have a wonderful morning or afternoon or evening, depending on what time it is when you watch this video. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace.